Sponsored by Rabbi Shlomi and Mirala Greenwald. This is a Sicha from Likutei Sichos, Chelek Yud, Parshas Vayeshev, Sicha Aleph. And the topic of the Sicha is that in this week's Parsha, we learned the pasuk of Vayugat LeTamar. It was said to Tamar v'Gomer, Lamer, they said, Hine chamich oile simnasa. Behold, your father-in-law Yehuda is going up to the city of Timnah. And we learned the teaching of Rashi on this pasuk. And there are 4 parts in the Sicha. The Rebbe will, number 1, ask 4 questions on Rashi. Number 2, present the key to answering these 4 questions. Number 3, answer the 4 questions. And number 4, present the Yenish al Torah and the Haira in this teaching of Rashi. On the pasuk of Vayugat LeTamar v'Gomer, it was told to Tamar that Hine, behold, your father-in-law Yehuda is going up to the city of Timnah. So Rashi quotes the words Oila Timnasa, that he's going up to the city of Timnah, and Rashi explains Uvishimshin hu Aimer, and by Shimshin he says over there Vayered Shimshin Timnasa, that Shimshin went down to Timnah. So we have a contradiction. Here it says Oila Timnasa, and over there it says Vayered Shimshin Timnasa. And the explanation is that Bishipua Ahar Haisa Yesheves. The city of Timnah was on the incline of the mountain. Oidlin la mikan, you would go up to it from this direction. Veyerdin la mikan, and you'd go down to it from this direction. And therefore by Yehuda it says Oila Timnasa, because he came from the direction of the bottom of the mountain. And by Shimshin it says Vayered Shimshin Timnasa, because he came down to it from the top of the mountain. And there are 4 questions here. The first question is this contradiction from where it says by Shimshin Vayered Shimshin Timnasa, that Shimshin went down to the city of Timnah. So this contradiction to what it says over here about Timnah, that you would go up to the city of Timnah, it already arises in the previous pasuk, where it also says over there that Vayal v'Gomer Timnasa, that Yehuda went up to the city of Timnah. And so the question is, Rashi should have said this teaching of his in the previous pasuk. Over there, he should have pointed out that there's a contradiction from Vayered Shimshin Timnasa to what it says Vayal v'Gomer Timnasa. Why does Rashi only present this teaching of his in our pasuk? The second question is, since the whole approach of Rashi is to explain Pshutei Shel Mikra, and he explains it for a Ben Chamesh L'Mikra, so it's understood that the only purpose of Rashi is to explain matters that the student who's learning Pshutei Shel Mikra and is a Ben Chamesh L'Mikra, such things that such a student will find difficult while learning this pasuk. But Rashi doesn't explain a pasuk which on its own, when you read it, is understood. He's not going to explain it so that it should fit with questions and contradictions that the student didn't yet learn. So if this pasuk is understood, Rashi is not going to address and explain anything about the pasuk, even though there may be a contradiction or a question on this pasuk from a later pasuk. When we get to the later pasuk, then Rashi will address it. And so in our case, since in this pasuk itself there's no difficulty, you could just learn very simply that Timnah was on top of a mountain. And it's just that you could ask on our pasuk from a later pasuk. So if in this pasuk itself there's no difficulty, so what's the reason of Rashi that he resolves the contradiction here in our parsha? The right place to resolve this contradiction would seem to be in Sefer Shoftim, when the Talmud learns the pasuk by Shimshin, where it says over there that Vayered Shimshin Timnasa. The third question is, why does Rashi write at the beginning at length, Uvishimshin hu Eimer? And by Shimshin he says, since Rashi right afterwards anyway quotes from the pasuk Vayered Shimshin Timnasa, so we know it's talking about Shimshin. So why doesn't Rashi just write in short something like Uchsiv? On one end here it says Eila Timnasa, Uchsiv, and it's written elsewhere, Vayered Shimshin Timnasa, and Shimshin went down to Timnah. We know that every word in Rashi is exact. So why does Rashi over here write at the beginning, Uvishimshin hu Eimer? And the fourth question is, and this fourth question has two parts to it. There's the lead up into the question and the question itself. So the lead up is, in the Gemara, there are three answers to this question about the contradiction between what it says by Yehuda that he was Oila Timnasa and what it says by Shimshon that he was Vayera Timnasa. The first answer is that Shimshon is Ganaba, Shimshon who was denigrated in the city of Timnah, and like Rashi writes over there, because he married from the daughters of the Pelishtim that are forbidden to him. So Ksiv Be Yerida, therefore it says by him Yerida, because he went down through the city and in the city of Timnah. And Yehuda Shenis Alaba, and Yehuda who was elevated in the city of Timnah, and like Rashi explains, because through what happened in the city of Timnah, Peretz and Zarach were born, and through them there was established, and there were kings and Nevi'im that came from them. So since something good happened to him, so therefore Ksiv Be Aliyah, by him it's written Aliyah, he went up. Another answer is that Shtei Timnois Hayu. There were two cities of Timnah. Chad B'Yerida, one you would get to by going downwards, like into a valley. V'chad B'Aliyah, and one you would get to by going upwards, by climbing up, like on a mountain. And then the third answer is that Chada Timna Havai. This is the answer of Rashi. There's one city of Timna. The Osim Ahai Gisa Yerida. If one came to it from one direction, they would go down to the city. Or the Osim Ahai Gisa Aliyah. And if someone came to it from the other direction, they would go up into the city because it was on the incline of a mountain. And so the question is, why did Rashi choose the third answer in the Gemara and not one of the previous two? And this is especially difficult because the fact that the Gemara brings this as the third answer indicates that it's the least acceptable of the answers. And so why would Rashi, who Rashi comes to explain Pshutish Mikra, the simplest of answers, choose this third and final answer? So now we're going to move straight into answering these four questions, and we're going to begin by presenting the main point of the answer and answering question number 2, which asked that why does Rashi have to say anything over here if when we're learning this pasuk there's no difficulty, and it's only that there's a difficulty from a later pasuk in Sefer Shoftim which a student didn't yet learn. So the explanation in this is as follows. In this teaching of Rashi, his main intent isn't to resolve the contradiction between the use of the word Oila by Yehuda when he went to Timnah and the use of the word Vayered by Shimshon when he went to Timnah. Because like we said, the student doesn't yet know about this contradiction. But rather the intent of Rashi over here is to answer what can be asked about this word itself. There's actually a difficulty in this word itself, and that's what Rashi is mainly coming to explain and answer in the pasuk. And that is, the difficulty over here with this word itself is, why did the Torah need to describe the going of Yehuda to Timnah with the lashon of Aliyah? Why couldn't it just say that it was told to Tamar that your father-in-law Yehuda is going to Timnah? Why does it have to mention that it was that he, when he went to Timnah, he was Oila Timnasa? Meaning, why does the Torah point out that it was told to Tamar, Vayugad LeTamar, that her father-in-law was Oila Timnasa? Why can't it just say that he's going to Timnah? Is there any difference to the story that Tamar should know that Yehuda was going up and not going down or going straight? And like we find earlier by the Parshas Akedah, where Hashem told Avram, Va'aleyu v'gemer al achad harim, you should bring him up onto one of the mountains, and nevertheless, it says afterwards, Vayelech el hamokim. It doesn't say Vayal, and it says Vayavayu el hamokim. Not they went up to the mokim, Vayalu. And the reason is simple. Why it doesn't say Vayal and Vayalu. Because there's no difference in which manner they arrived to the place. And so the same should also be true here. So that answers our second question. We asked, why is Rashi addressing anything here? There's no difficulty over here. The difficulty only comes up later in Sefer Shoftim. The answer is that there is a difficulty here. And that's the main intent of Rashi over here with what he says, as we'll see how Rashi is answering that difficulty. The main intent of Rashi over here is to answer, why does the pasuk point out that what was told to Tamar is that Hinei Chamech Oile Timnasa, he's going up to Timnah. Why did you say Hinei Chamech Hoilech Timnasa? And that's the difficulty that Rashi is coming to address. So we see that there is a difficulty here, and that's why we need this teaching of Rashi. Now we're going to move on to answer question number 1, which now the question takes on a different understanding. The question is, if there's a difficulty in the pasuk describing that the way Yehuda went to Timnah is through Oila Timnasa, What do we care how he got to Timnah, whether it was through going up or going down or going straight? Then the same difficulty already exists in the previous pasuk, where it says Vayal Timnasa, that Yehuda went up to Timnah. However, even though we said this is a difficulty that the Torah says that it was Oila Timnasa, in the previous pasuk, even though it also says Vayal v'Gomer Timnasa, that he went up to Timnah, nevertheless there's no difficulty there. And the reason is because there we can explain that it doesn't refer to an aliyah on Gashmias, that he went up physically to the city of Timnah, but rather refers to an aliyah on Ruchnias, that he went up in the city of Timnah. But Ruchnias he went up, which means in his level of importance or his level of greatness. And this wouldn't be outside of Pshut Mikra, as we see that it says in the beginning of this very parsha. It says, Vayered Yehuda me'es Echav, Yehuda went down from among his brothers, and Rashi explains, Shahiridu Echav Migdulasai, that his brothers demoted him from his greatness because of his involvement in the story of Vayeshev, and as a leader in that whole story, therefore they demoted him. So this is referring to a Yerida Baruchnius, and so it makes sense that it says later on that Vayal, that he went up to tell us that he returned and went back up to his level in Ruchnius. So when it says over there Vayal, we'd understand it to mean in Ruchnius, and as a continuation to what it says at the beginning, that Vayered, which was a Ridu Echav Migdulasai. However, this can only be said when the Torah is saying it about Yehuda. If the Torah tells us, Vayal, he went up, the Torah knows that Yehuda would go up in the city of Timnah. He would return to his level of importance and his level of greatness. But you can't say that when a person is saying it to Tamar. It says, Vayugad lo Tamar, was told to Tamar. Then you can't explain that the person was referring to an Aliyah Beruchnius, because how would that person know that Yehuda is destined to have an Aliyah in Ruchnius? And so there we have a difficulty. Why did this person tell Tamar, and why is the Torah telling us that he told Tamar that Yehuda, your father-in-law, is Oila Timnasa, he's going up to Timnah? And so this is the question that Rashi has, like we said in the first part of the answer. And this is why Rashi only has this question on our pasuk and not in the previous pasuk. And now we're going to move on to see how Rashi answers this question. Now we're going to explain how Rashi answers this question, and we're also going to answer question number 4, which was, why did Rashi choose the third answer in the Gemara? We understand why he didn't choose the first answer, that Yehuda went up Beruchnis and Timnah, and Shimshon went down in Ruchnis and Timnah, because the question is, how would this person know about it? But why doesn't Rashi choose the second answer, that there were 2 cities of Timnah? So let's first see how Rashi answers this question about why it's even mentioned that Yehuda went up to the city of Timnah, and then we'll answer the 4th question. And Rashi answered this question about why did this person tell Tamar that Yehuda went up to Timnah, and what does the Torah tell us about this? He answers it by saying, "Uveshimshon u'emer vayered Shimshon Timnasa," and by Shimshon it says that Shimshon went down to Timnah, meaning that through resolving the contradiction from Shimshon, so the question in this pasuk is automatically answered. So the purpose of answering the contradiction is in order to answer the question that we have over here. Because once we established, the way it's answered is because once we established that Bishipu Ahar Hoysa Yesheves, that the city of Timnah rested on the incline of a mountain. Oilin Lamikan v'Yordin Lamikan, you'd go up to it from one direction and down to it from the other direction. So it's understood that the person told Tamar that Yehuda was Oila Timnasa in order that she should know from which direction he's entering the city. It's important to know which direction did he enter. The way the person communicated it to Tamar was by saying that he went up to Timnah. So now Tamar knew that Yehuda came to the city from the direction of the bottom of the mountain. So it was an order to tell Tamar from which direction Yehuda entered the city, so she should know where he is. And according to this, it's understood, or Rashi doesn't explain that Shtei Timnois Hayu, that there were 2 Timnas. Because since he's not coming to resolve the contradiction from Shimshon, but rather to explain the use of the word Oile, why does it say Oile here? If we say that it was an incline, so it's important to tell her that he's Oile, to know where in the city she could find him, which part of the city did he enter. But to answer Oila, that won't be explained by saying there are 2 Timnas. And the person said Oila to indicate which Timna it is. It's the one that you go up to, not the one that you go down to. It's the one on top of a mountain, not the one in the valley. For 3 reasons. Number 1, that's not how a city is referred to. but rather, like it says, we find Beis Chayrin Tachten and Beis Chayrin Elyon. If you want to say which Timna you're referring to, you don't indicate it by saying he went up to Timna. You say the upper Timna, the lower Timna, something to that effect. Number two, since the person didn't specify anything in the name of the city, the person just said Oila Timnasa. For the word Timna, just used Timna, didn't specify which Timna. It indicates that there was no question about which city it was. And so if there was no question about which city it was, and possibly because the other one was very far and this one was closer, and so it was obvious which one it was, there's no need to describe it now by saying Oila, going up. We already know which one it is because of the area that they were in, and this was closer. And number three, the two cities weren't close to one another, which makes sense. You don't give two cities the same name that are near one another, and we indeed find that they were located at a distance from one another. And so if they weren't near one another, so there would be no need to refer to one of them through saying Oila. We're clearly talking about the one that's near and not the other one. And so for these three reasons, we wouldn't have an explanation for why he said Oila. If it was because there was two Timnas, that's not the way the person would communicate it. And clearly we see over here there was no need to communicate it. And so the only explanation for why the person said Oila is if the city was resting on the incline of a mountain, and it was ordered to indicate to Tamar where she could find Yehuda. She could find Yehuda by knowing that he went into the city, entered the city by going up into the city. He came from the bottom of the mountain and he entered the city from that direction. At this point, we answered three of our questions, and these were in a way the main questions. We understand what's the difficulty that Rashi has on this pasuk. We understand why the difficulty only comes up in our pasuk and not the previous pasuk that also says Vayal Timnasa. And we understand why Rashi chooses to answer this question with the third answer that's brought in the Gemara. And now we're going to move on to answer the third question on Rashi, which was, why does Rashi write Uvishimshin hu Eimer and not something like Uchsiv Vayer Shimshin? Why does he have to mention Uvishimshin hu Eimer? And as we'll see, Rashi does this in order to respond to a challenge that one could have on his explanation. Somebody can challenge Rashi's explanation and propose a different answer. And Rashi writes Uvishimshin hu Eimer in order to respond to that challenge. So let's see what that is. However, even after all of this, there's still a difficulty in this very explanation that Bishipua Ahar Vayeshev, the very idea that the city of Timna was built on the incline of a mountain, that itself is a difficult thing to say, because it's very unusual to build a city on the incline of a mountain, because it doesn't have the advantage of being better protected like a city on top of a mountain. So when one builds a city on top of a mountain, there are disadvantages. It's more difficult to build, to bring the building materials, and after it's built, it's not so ideal for commerce because it's difficult for people to come to that city. However, it has an advantage that it's better protected. But when a city is on the incline, it doesn't have that advantage, and it doesn't have the advantage either of being easier to build, like a city that's not on top of a mountain, where it's easier to build, and it's also better for commerce and the development of the city. So being on an incline to build a city on the incline of a mountain is very unusual. And in addition, besides not having these advantages, when a city is built on the incline of a mountain, the parts of the city are built on top of one another, which is another disadvantage. And so there's a difficulty over here. There's a difficulty in Rashi's explanation, which is, why don't we say that Timna was on top of the mountain? So there's an area on bottom, then there's the area on top, and imagine it that the mountain just continues for a long distance. And what we're going to say is as follows. The meaning of Aliyah and Yerida are explained differently in each place. By Yehuda, it means in Gashmias. And so that's why the person said, Vayugad LeTamar, was told to Tamar that Yehuda is going up to the city of Timna, so that she should know that he's going from the bottom of the mountain to the top, because it was built on top of the mountain, and he's not coming from the other side, which is already on top of the mountain. So by Yehuda, it means in Gashmias, that he was going up the mountain, and that's why it was told to Yehuda, to Tamar, so she should know from where Yehuda entered the city. And by Shimshon, it means in Ruchnius, that he had a Yerida in the city of Timna. Why don't we explain it that way? And the advantage is that we're not going to say that the city was built on an incline, which is a difficult thing to say. And therefore, in order to respond to this, Rashi writes, Uveshimshin hu oimer, in order to hint to what compels him to explain that Timna was bishipua ahar Vayeshev, that Timna was resting, it was on the incline of the mountain. Because since it says you read the by Shimshin many times, Uveshimshin hu oimer means that it says it many times, not just once. It's oimer over and over again. So it doesn't make sense to say that each time it means a Yerida and Ruchnius. Each time you went to Timna, there was a Yerida and Ruchnius. And so we must say that Timna was Bishipua Haris Vayeshev, since it says it over and over again. And over here, when it says Oila, it must mean that he was going up. And by Shimshon, since it says it many times, it must mean physically going down. Therefore, we must say that Bishipua Haris Vayeshev, that Timna was on the incline of the mountain. From the Yenishal Torah and Rashi, in the Hira, the lesson in the Avodah of each and every one, it's explained elsewhere regarding the pasuk of Mi Ya'ala Bahar Hashem V'Gomer, that it's referring to Avodah Hashem. So it's explained that the Avodah of a person is like climbing up a mountain. And it's known that when a person is climbing up a mountain physically, they cannot stop in middle and stay for any period of time on the incline, because it's nearly impossible that they won't slip and fall down, but rather one must constantly continue going up without stop. And similarly, when it comes to climbing up Bahar Hashem, in Avodas Hashem, that the necessity to constantly climb up isn't just for the benefit of rising higher, because a person always has to go higher, but rather also to ensure that one doesn't fall. Meaning to say that a person should not be satisfied with the level they reached until now, because being satisfied and not rising higher will eventually bring to a Yerida. In Avodas Hashem, a person is basically either going up or going down. And so the necessity to constantly go up is not just because a person has to go up, but also to ensure that a person doesn't go down. Because if a person is not going up, then they'll eventually go down. It'll eventually bring to a Yerida. And this idea is especially emphasized in the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah, that a person is either going up or going down. Where the Mahadran, Mina Mahadran on Chanukah Chulu, they're Yom Rishon Madlik Echad. The first night they light one candle. Mikan ve'elach moisef v'helach. And from here on, they constantly add more, because Mylin b'kodesh ve'ein meridin. And now if one doesn't add a Ner on the second night, then not only didn't they add and go up in Kodesh over the day before, but rather they also decreased, because the day before they did it behidr. And tonight, what's the hidr? To add a candle, and they didn't add. So it's either Mylin b'kodesh or it's meridin. A person is either going up or going down. Either the person will add a candle each night, and by doing that, they're Mylin b'kodesh, they're going up in kodesh. Or if they don't add a candle and they keep the same number as the night before, then they were meridin, because the night before they did the mitzvah behidr, and tonight they didn't do the mitzvah behidr. So they also decreased. They had a Yerida by not doing the mitzvah behidr. And if one wants to fulfill the mitzvah with the same hidr as the previous day, then they must go up in Kodesh. And this is actually one of the explanations in the teaching of Mylin b'Kodesh ve'ein meridin. One explanation is that it's saying Mylin b'Kodesh, a person should go up in Kodesh. Ve'ein meridin, at the very least, the person shouldn't go down in Kodesh. Another explanation is that it's really saying the same thing twice. It's saying Mylin b'Kodesh, a person has to go up in Kodesh, ve'ein meridin, not go down, because it's one or the two. It's either Mylin or meridin. So it's saying Mylin b'Kodesh, a person must be Mylin Kodesh, a person must go up in Kodesh. And it's emphasizing it and saying ve'ein meridin, and don't go down, because if you're not going up, then a person's going down. And this idea is hinted to in the words of Rashi, that the reason it says Aliyah and Yerida by Timna is because Bishipua Haris Vayeshev. Why does it say Aliyah or Yerida? Because it rested on the incline. And therefore there's only Aliyah and Yerida, there's nothing else. Because on the incline of the mountain, which like we said refers to the Avodah of going up in Ruchnius, one cannot stand, and even the movement isn't usual. It's not enough even to move. A person has to go up. There's only up and down. There's not even straight. But rather it must be either an Aliyah or a Yerida. So in Har Hashem, says Rashi, in the Avodas Hashem, there's only an Aliyah and a Yerida. There's no other option. And just like the Aliyah of Yehuda brought about the birth of Peretz Mashiach, Shenemar Olah HaPeretz Lefneim, and brought about the birth of Mashiach, so too through the Avodah of each and every one, in going up higher from one level to the next level, in their personal Har Hashem, so we will merit the fulfillment of the Yud of Olu Meishim Bartziin Lishpeitas Arhesav Vayeishev Hashem Amlucha, with the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu.